When you're making a from scratch green bean casserole, especially with the green beans you have grown and preserved yourself, and homemade bone broth, which I highly recommend, you do not want to ruin it by using store-bought condensed cream of anything soup, especially when you can make it at home from scratch in mere minutes. I promise you will never buy store-bought condensed cream anything soup again after you see how easy it is. So you can easily make cream of condensed anything soup at home. Now, of course, today I'm doing from scratch green bean casserole, and usually you use cream of mushroom soup. So I've got some button mushrooms here, and I'm gonna add just a little bit of diced onion. And I've got, this is actually a blush onion that we grew and raised ourselves. And these ones have a little bit shorter shelf life. That was a tongue twister coming out. So, but feel free to use yellow or white onion, whatever your preference is. We're gonna get these chopped up, and that's probably the most labor-intensive part you're gonna have of this whole recipe, is just mincing up some of your onions and mushrooms. Now, if you want cream of celery soup, then you would just mince up a little bit of celery instead. So let's get this ready to go. So you're gonna take 3 tablespoons of butter. And if you need to be dairy-free, then you can absolutely do any type of fat source that you want. You can do lard, you can do bacon grease, you can do coconut oil, whatever suits your fancy. So we're just gonna get that melted. So we're just gonna put it on about medium-high, just a little bit tad under medium-high. And for the printable version of this recipe, you could go over to the blog. I'll have a link beneath the video so you can go and snag that with all of the different variations on making all the different kinds of how you transition this first part, which is making our cream of mushroom soup replacement or from scratch, where you can look at all the other variations, and you can do cream of potato, cream of celery, of course, cream of chicken. And with this one, I'm gonna use a little bit of chicken broth as well as our milk, but there's lots of different ways that you can do this for whatever type of dietary restrictions or preferences that you may have. So we're gonna go ahead and get our butter all the way melted here. And then we've got diced up our onion and our mushroom. And so as soon as our butter is melted, we'll just begin sauteing those. So while our butter is melting, we are going to get our green beans drained. So you can use frozen green beans that you have thawed. You can use fresh green beans. If you're using fresh, you're gonna want to blanch them a little bit beforehand, unless you happen to like them a little bit crunchy. For these, my seal is really good on those ones. We're just gonna go ahead and drain these. So when I'm doing my green bean casserole, I like to use 2 pints of green beans, which is about 4 cups, or obviously you could use a quart if you're going with your home canned ones. All right, so these guys are ready to go. So we're gonna go ahead and begin sauteing our mushrooms and our onions. You're gonna wanna use about a 1/4 cup of mushrooms per 1 can of condensed soup replacement, and then we're gonna do about a 1/4 cup of the onions. So I've got a little bit extra here. So we're just gonna get those sauteed up. And I've got extra butter in here because you're gonna want that extra fat source when we go ahead and add our thickener in just a moment. So we're just gonna let these saute just until they're slightly cooked and the onions start to look a little bit translucent. And this is actually salted butter, so I'm only gonna add a small amount of salt to this, but we definitely wanna do some fresh ground black pepper. And that is just to taste for you. So once your mushrooms and your onions have sauteed about 3 or 4 minutes, now it's time to add our thickener. So I'm gonna do 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. You can also use xanthan gum if you need to be gluten-free. And then we're gonna just stir this together, and we're gonna create a little bit of a paste. I'm gonna turn my heat down just a smidge. So we're gonna let that flour soak up all of our melted butter. There we go. And now we are going to add first a 1/2 cup of chicken broth. Get my whisk out here. So using the chicken broth is going to give it some additional flavor. And then you're going to whisk that in. And you can see that's getting nice and thick already, but it's going to get really thick. And of course, that is too thick for a condensed cream replacement. So now you've got a couple of options. If you want to be really decadent and flavorful, you can use full cream. I don't have any cream, but I do have whole milk. So I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of whole milk. And we're going to whisk this together. And I promise this is gonna taste much better than any condensed anything you get from the store. And you can see this whipped up and like it's done. Like 4 to 5 minutes, which is much. I can't even find a parking spot at the store in the amount of time that you can make this at home from scratch. So if it gets a little bit too thick, simply add a little bit more liquid if you want to thin that out somewhat. This is just about right. And the longer you let it simmer, it will thicken a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the heat because this is ready. And the other beautiful thing is if you use a cast iron pan to begin with, you only have 1 dish to wash. And we're going to use this to cook our green bean casserole in. So now we're going to take our green beans here that we've already drained. And we're gonna stir those together. Now I like a lot of green beans in my green bean casserole because I happen to love the flavor. So you can adjust this as is, but I think that using those 4 cups or 2 pints is just about perfect. Now when it comes to your topping for your green bean casserole, most of us are familiar with the old Thanksgiving standby of using the French fried onions, right, that you buy in the can. But I wanted a completely from scratch version, and you can make it home French fried onions, but I gotta be telling you, when it comes to Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner, I just do not have time to do homemade French fried onions. So if you wanna have the French fried onions, you can either make them from scratch or put it on there, but we've got lots of other options to really take this up a notch. So I have to tell you, I'm really excited to test this one out. And yes, I have washed my fingers and hands before cooking, so no worries there that I'm touching this spoon and putting that in there. So you've got a few options of things, the ways that you can do for toppings on this. You can do some breadcrumbs with Parmesan cheese, and that's gonna create a nice little crunch on top. Of course, if you're making homemade breads and you can make bread, you can put and make your own homemade breadcrumbs really easily. Cheese is a great option, but one of the reasons I like the French fried onions, and most people do too, and it's on top of a green bean casserole often, is because of the taste and the crunch factor. Well, what tastes better and still has the crunch factor, you ask? Bacon. So I have already cooked this bacon up, as you obviously can see. I'm gonna set that there. And we're just gonna go ahead and crumble that on top. So after you've put your desired topping on top of your green bean casserole, it's time to pop it in a preheated oven, 350 degrees Fahrenheit, for about 20 to 25 minutes. We're really just trying to heat up the green beans because everything is already fully cooked. Okay guys, time to pull out our green bean casserole. Oh, nice and bubbly. Oh, and if you could only smell it, it smells so good. So I'll set that there. So you have got a couple options at this point. You can serve it just as is, or if you wanted to add a little bit of Parmesan, which you can tell I definitely do, I'm gonna add just a small amount of fresh grated Parmesan to this. You can add as little or as much as you want, and this is ready to serve. So completely homemade from scratch green bean casserole. And now that you know how easy it is, you have to promise me you'll never buy a store-bought can of condensed cream of anything soup again, okay?